You can never go wrong if you choose to actually do farming as a business. This is obvious. It's because food is needed every day and everywhere in the entire world. But of course, simply starting a farming business doesn't mean you'll be successful 100%. In fact, when you do start a farming business, you're more likely to fail statistically because there's a lot of variables that affect your ability to succeed. Luckily enough, almost all these variables are in your control. Just a few of them are out of your control. And again, it's up to you to choose which of the farming businesses you choose to go for. The three main things that affect your success are: number one, the knowledge stroke skills; number two, the timing; and number three, your sales and marketing. We'll start with the knowledge. You do choose to start your farming business, whether it's plants, you decide to grow crops, you decide to, let's say, grow mushrooms, or whether you're deciding to keep cattle, or whether you're deciding to keep chickens. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know how much you need to invest. You need to know where to invest. You need to know where your business should be located. You need to know how to raise the animals. For example, if it's chickens, you need to know how you're going to raise the animals, because if you don't raise the animals, you won't have a product to sell in the end. There'll be loads of hungry people and you won't have chickens to feed them. There'll be loads of hungry people and you won't have goats or sheep to feed them. So you need to make sure you have the product. So for you to get to that point, you need to make sure that the animals grow, and you need the knowledge to make sure they grow to that point. Timing is very important. When it comes to something, timing is even more specific, especially when it involves growing crops. This is a plant that I have at home, and it's very directly affected by the climate and the weather. During the rainy season, it will be green and looking nice and lush like this. During the dry season, it can turn and start looking funny, and you need to water it. Now, this is just one plant that I have. But if you're growing crops and you're growing, let's say, 20, 30 acres of crops, then it's not as easy to maintain it during the dry season. Then you need to think about that. But also, and even more importantly, the sales and the marketing. This is where most of the farmers fail. A lot of people imagine that, well, food is needed and people need food everywhere, anywhere. You'll just get up in the morning and people will be knocking on your door wanting to buy your product. No, it doesn't work that way. It's very important that you learn how to do the sales and the marketing of your business. I believe my ability to learn sales and marketing is actually what enabled me to get to this point. But let's put that aside. Let's imagine you've gotten the willpower and the drive to get all the knowledge that require. You've actually gotten all the skills. You get your timing right, and you know when to plant and harvest. And you've managed to go to Skillshare using the link in the description below. You've gotten a free subscription. You've learned a lot about sales and marketing, and so you're on point of your sales and marketing game. Today I'm going to be telling you why, of all the farming businesses out there, I do believe that poultry is the best for you. Poultry is why you're most likely to make the cut and actually grow rich. Oh, by the way, you might wonder why I'm home. I'm not recording the video from the farm. It's because I've been very busy recently organizing for an expo. It's called the Harvest Money Expo, over here in Uganda, and it's an exhibition for farmers, and we're going to be exhibiting at the expo. So actually, if you're in Uganda and you want to meet Dr. Daniel for the very first time ever, hey, we're going to be at the Harvest Money Expo. That's starting the 10th, 11th, and 12th at Kololo Independence Ground. So just be there from early in the morning to late in the evening. I'll be around, teaching you guys what to do in farming and showing off what we do have at Farm Up. It's going to be a beautiful one. And yeah, that's why I've been unavailable. I haven't been making videos recently because I've been preparing for this and a lot of other things. So back to the point. First, what's the competition against poultry? Because I've already told you guys, I believe poultry is the best alternative. But what are the other alternatives? There's mainly two things. Number one, growing crops, and number two, the other animals that are not chickens. The other animals include animals like cattle, goats, sheep, piggery, rabbits, fish, and all the other animals that you know about. But let's start with the crops. I believe crops are that one thing that I can never ever do for business, unless I have particular things, unless I'm doing greenhouse farming. And it's from experience. It's not just a bias. It's because I've experienced it. The interesting bit is that I have friends and people I've talked to, and they'll tell you they can never ever do farming that's not crops. And it's okay. That's what they believe. That's what they have experienced. My experience has been different, and I'll just tell you guys why. You see, growing crops is very, very weather dependent, unless you're doing greenhouse farming. Now, I've put greenhouse farming aside, but it's another alternative. And if you're willing to do greenhouse farming, of course the investment will be higher, but it's way better because there you have absolute control of almost everything. If you're not doing greenhouse farming and you don't have absolute control of everything, then it can get very, very chaotic. Recently, there's lots of climate change, loads and loads of climate change. In the past, everyone knew when to plant. For example, for us over here in Uganda, we knew that you would plant at the end of Feb, and then the rain season will probably go through March, April, and May. You know, May you start harvesting, or June, and then again you would start planting in September. These days, there's nothing like that. People just plant anywhere, anyhow, randomly. If you're lucky, you'll get something. If you're not lucky, you won't get anything. That's what actually affected our maize season recently in Uganda, and the prices of maize shot up, but simply because the rains were coming at different times, at unusual times. People plant their crops, and when you expect the rains to be falling, it becomes dry, so that your crops haven't started flowering, they're all wither. It becomes really, really complicated. So that's the main reason I believe crops are just not a very viable option unless you're doing greenhouse farming. There's completely no control. You never know what you're going to get and when you're going to get it. So that's why I would never go into it. And now let's go to the animals. We shall start with cattle. Now cattle, the biggest problem is that there is a very huge barrier to entry. Number one, because cattle are expensive generally. One calf will probably cost upwards of $300, $400. If you want to start with a big cow, you'll cost upwards of $1,000, sometimes $2,000 for simply one good breed of a cow. The barrier to entry is very high. It's very expensive in terms of money having to start. And not just that, you need loads of space to look after cattle. So you're not going to be doing any proper farming business with just one cow. That's simply doing hobbyist or passion, but not business. If you want to do it as a business, you're going to need quite a number of cattle. And that requires that you're going to need to have a lot of land for it to make sense. A lot of land, loads of land, because cattle eat grass. If you're not going to have loads of land, then you're going to be doing zero grazing, zero grazing. But then that becomes very, very expensive because cattle eat lots and lots of grass. So you're going to have to buy lots of grass, transport it to wherever you're going to be keeping your 2 cows. If you're going to be doing, let's say, dairy cows, and you're going to be collecting milk, you're going to have to buy loads of grass. So it becomes very expensive. But again, it gets back to the first point. Even if you're going to be having just 2 dairy cattle, you're going to have to pay a lot of money simply to have those 2 dairy cattle. So it becomes very expensive getting into the business. The other thing is that the growth is really, really slow, really slow. You can maintain something if, for example, you start with 2 dairy cattle in a controlled environment, you can maintain it. But I don't think you're going to get really rich from having 2 dairy cattle. No, you're going to have loads and loads of cattle for you to become rich from dairy farming. You're going to have to at least have, let's say, 10 or 20 dairy cattle giving you quite an amount of milk every day for you to actually become rich. So you need big numbers, or else the growth is going to be really slow. Imagine you're keeping cattle for selling for beef. By the time you get numbers big enough that they can reproduce and sustain the farm, that takes a really, really long time. And the other problem with cattle is that the medications are expensive. This is from personal experience, especially for us here in Uganda. We have loads and loads of diseases, tick-borne diseases. Ticks are everywhere, and they have loads of diseases. So you end up spending a lot on money just simply buying medicine, acaricides to spray the animals. When they get sick, you're continuously treating them. Then when it gets to the goats and sheep, the barriers are not as high as the cattle, but they're also quite high because, again, for goats and sheep, it's simply about the young ones that you reproduce. The more and the quicker you reproduce, the better for you. And what does that mean? Number one, you're going to need space for the goats and the sheep to graze for you to actually have those numbers grow up. But number two, the goats are also relatively expensive. For example, compared to chickens, you're going to pay more for goats. For a single chick, you're going to probably pay $1 or less than $1. Or by dollars, I'm saying US dollars, simply for reference for everyone who is watching all around the world. For goats, you're going to be paying maybe 10, 15, 20 times the price of a chicken. So the barrier for entry is higher, and you're not going to just need one, you're going to need quite a number. Of course, not as high as cattle, but it's high in terms of how much you need to invest in getting the animals themselves. And also, like I've said, you need grazing land for these animals. Then the other one is piggery. Now, piggery, the biggest issue with it is the limitation in terms of market. I know a lot of the people who are watching the channel, for example, are Muslim, and all people from particular cultures in particular countries, they don't eat pork. They don't eat pigs. It's a taboo. It's against religion. So a lot of the people won't be looking after these animals. So you're going to be restricted in terms of who you can sell to. But for example, in my country, in Uganda, that's not a limitation. Yeah, there's quite a big market for piggery. But the reason a lot of people fail is because the disease burden is way higher. It's not that there's more more diseases for pigs, but it's because it's way more sensitive. I've had lots of people lose their animals to African swine fever. It's a very, very pathetic disease, terrible disease, and it kills horribly. Lots of animals get it and they die every year. Lots of animals all around the country, they die every year. So that's also a very big limitation. People can invest a lot of money, but I know lots of people who have invested a lot of money and their animals all just die like quickly, really quickly. So again, it's something that it's a good option, but again, not the best option that I would give you. And then you'll get to rabbits. Now, rabbits are that one thing which would actually have competed with chickens very well, because buying them is not as expensive. Number one, you don't need too much space to keep them. In small space, you can keep quite a number of rabbits in cages. Feeding them is not very difficult because they don't eat too much. They don't have a high disease burden. Biggest problem, market. Because how many people do you actually know who do eat rabbits? How many places would you go to and you find people eating rabbits every day? So the biggest issue with rabbits is market. Very, very, very complicated. You can keep them in huge numbers. I have people who have kept them in huge numbers, but getting rid of them is difficult. And they're tasty. I don't understand why people don't eat them. They're really tasty. I actually do have some at my home over here. Rabbits are really tasty. But again, market is the down point. And then you'll have things like fishery. You know, fish, very nice meat. People love it. They eat it everywhere. But how many of us can actually manage to have fish ponds? It's a problem because you need a particular kind of area to actually have a fish pond. It needs to be quite big. They need to be so big, but it needs to be, you know, a place which can get drained, where water will come in and go out. You don't just have a fish pond anywhere. So again, you're limited on where you can have a fish pond. You can't take a fish pond up in the mountains, for example. It's quite difficult. So again, the barrier to entry there is quite high. So then let's get to poultry, the chickens. Chicken is the most commonly eaten meat all around the world. It's the most commonly eaten and it's the cheapest meat. Number two, eggs are eaten all around the world and they are put in almost anything. Bakery, they are used in bakery, they are used for cooking almost anything. Chefs use eggs like everything, in everything, everywhere. So there is market. And the one thing I learned is that the easiest way to start a business, simply sell things that people are already buying and find a way of distinguishing yourself. People identifying who you are and distinguishing you in a point that stands out. And by the way, that's also one of the things I've actually learned from Skillshare. Again, there's a link in the description below for you to go and get a free Skillshare subscription for 1 month with unlimited access to classes. You're going to learn a lot of these things. Link in the description. The world population is increasing and increasing spontaneously. For us here in Uganda, man, in the last 20 years, I think it has doubled. So it's increasing really quickly and the demand is present. In a lot of African countries, I know it's skyrocketing. It's just in a few countries that you'll find the population consistent or falling, but in most parts of the world, the population is increasing, and that means the market and the demand is there. So how does poultry beat the rest of the farming industry? Number one, we already said market, but number two, it's cheap to start in comparison to almost all the rest. Really cheap to start because buying chickens is really cheap. You know, with about $100, you can easily buy 100 chickens. Just $100. That's $1 a chicken. You just need a little bit of equipment. You don't need a lot of land in order to be able to start a poultry farm. So it's very, very easy to start. Number two, the medications are quite cheap. Really cheap. It's not like cattle, yeah? You'll have a few vaccinations and maybe deworming, and you don't need to treat the birds. As long as you do your biosecurity well, you never need to treat the birds. And even when the birds get sick, because chickens are generally small animals, the doses that are given to them are actually smaller. So you don't spend too much money treating the birds unless you just don't get the first aspect, which was the skill and the knowledge, and then your birds are just consistently falling sick. But if you get the others on point, then the animals are not going to fall sick and you're going to spend a lot of money on medication. Also, the growth is really quick. You know, chickens grow really quickly. If you're doing broilers, in 6 weeks, you start and sell off. If you're doing layers, in 4.5 months, you start and you're already producing eggs. It's not like cattle where you're going to wait years before they reproduce. You know, it gets pregnant, it waits for 9 months, it produces just one, and then you're going to take I don't know how many more months before you get another calf. With chickens, everything is quick and easy. And also with poultry, there is loads and loads of knowledge. When I started, there was barely any knowledge of poultry on the market. You know, it was very scanty. You had to look for books. But I, Dr. Daniel from FarmUp, have actually put loads and loads of free knowledge available, present on the internet. So it means that you can actually learn so much about poultry. Literally all the barriers that would prevent you from starting a poultry business have been catered with. They have been dealt with. So you see what I'm talking about. Starting a poultry business is quick, easy, and it's profitable. As long as you understand how to find the market, deal with the market, everything else is easier. You know, you learn how to deal with the biosecurity so that you don't get diseases on the farm. Everything else is easier compared to the rest of the businesses. So that's it. With poultry business, you can never ever go wrong. You can never go wrong. The demand is there. Just learn how to do the things well, and hey, you're almost guaranteed success. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash that notification bell. That way you never miss out on an upload. Lots of love. Bye-bye.